make sure that you encrypt things and then put a password on it. Not very helpful either.
You mean you don't use password as your password?
Password 1, password 2, password 3. That goes with each of our laptops.
My password is, what is my password?
That's it. I like that idea you had.
You're listening to the Help Me with HIPAA podcast, where HIPAA and humor collide to make learning fun. Your delightful hosts are Donna Grindle and David Sims. Relax, HIPAA help is on the way.
Welcome to the Help Me with HIPAA podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about encryption. If it moves, encrypt it. That's what OCR says. But before we get into that, I want to welcome my co-host, Donna Grindle. How are you today, Donna?
I am fantastic, David Sims.
I'm glad you have some fantasticism going on. For those of you who listen to past episodes, you'll know what that's all about. So we want to dive into a little bit more about encryption. In episode 2, we actually talked about encryption and what it is and not quite deep below the surface of it, but just kind of a high-level overview of it. So we keep getting questions, and I know that you get them as well, more about, okay, you say we need to do encryption, but what does that exactly mean? Or you say we have to encrypt things, but kind of tell me a little bit more about what that means, because that's kind of a subjective term when you say, hey, you need to encrypt your server, or you need to encrypt your hard drive, or you need to encrypt your laptops. So let's talk a little bit more about what that entails, because you can't just do encryption and be okay. There's more around it than that.
Well, and the other question is, what's it going to cost me?
Oh, we'll talk about that later. Let's just do it first, and then we'll bill you.
That's the tech people, we can't control ourselves.
If you're having to ask that question, you can't afford it.
Not really.
Yeah, it's not that bad, really, though.
No, there's a lot of ways to address it, and really, this episode it came as a result of conversations that I've been having with a couple of clients who say, "Okay, we really want to do this, but we don't even know where to start. We don't know what to do." And in our episode 2, that's the infamous Crackerjack episode. Pet pterodactyl crackerjack episode.
It was a Tyrannosaurus. It was a Tyrannosaurus.
Yeah, Tyrannosaurus with the little hands. But
that's you.
Tyrannosaurus push-ups. The episode 2 link will be in the show notes if you want to go back and listen to it, but it tries to explain the concepts of encryption itself. This topic is going to be a bit more about how you would go about actually implementing encryption in your environment. So first thing I wanted to review is, we talked about before, is there's encryption in transit and encryption at rest. So when you talk about encryption in transit, that is when there's actual communications taking place. And if you do HTTPS, SSL, SFTP, VPN, you'll hear those words being tossed around. That means that the communication between two devices is encrypted from prying eyes looking at the data that's flying back and forth through the interwebs, as people say. But all the other kind of encryption, when you're talking about encryption of data at rest, is when the data lands somewhere on a device. Is it encrypted there or not? And that's where people generally run into problems, and that's where they're calling and asking us for, where do I start? Because most of those communications, other than people who are doing websites that are not HTTPS and letting people register online, that's a whole nother topic. That's like putting a piece of a splinter of wood up under a fingernail to me. But you're doing what on your website? Let me look. Oh, really? Okay. Anyhow, the encryption of data on a device, it's an important thing that people now are like, oh, I got to encrypt everything because, everybody says that if you don't encrypt it, you're going to get huge fines. Well, remember, if you have a device that's sitting in a cage inside, a locked cage inside a locked and you got to have retina scans and all this stuff to get into it, and you encrypt that device, it really it's not a lot of bang for your buck, because the encryption of data at rest really comes into play when it's literally at rest. It's not open for people, because if you have the key and you're open and you're working with the computer or the device that has it, well, it's no longer encrypted. That's how it's unlocked.
Mm-hmm.
So encrypting things, you want to make sure that you're encrypting things that need the encryption the most first, because people come in and they have nothing encrypted and they worry about their server at a data center. No, let's don't worry about that first. Let's worry about this laptop that has everything on it in a spreadsheet that you carry around every day. And then everybody talks about, oh, well, what kind of encryption? And I need strong encryption. Well, keep in mind, as we go through this, that no one can define clearly exactly what that is, because there's a big debate going on. Law enforcement, people like not just your police on the street corner here, but also Department of Homeland Security and all these guys, they want to have a backdoor into encrypted data. And so there's this big thing that's going on in the industry to sort that out. So just know that things are changing where encryption is concerned, like any other piece of technology.
Mm-hmm.
So, do you know what HIPAA says about encryption, David?
It says it is addressable. It's not a requirement.
But
however,
it's not a required element. It means you can do it. You should do it in some way that is reasonable and appropriate in your environment. Implement a mechanism to encrypt electronic protected health information whenever deemed appropriate.
There's that word again.
Mm-hmm. And you're so often inappropriate that... Yeah, but the statement, it's not really helpful if you tell somebody, it goes back to, well, if you can just read HIPAA, you can implement it. Well, no, not so much. You just read that. Now what do? Go implement it? There's always a question of what level of encryption, how do I go about it, and all of this kind of stuff. And so there's been a lot of debate, not only in the industry about what encryption it is, but amongst people within your same organization about what should and shouldn't be encrypted. Well, OCR at the HIPAA security conference this year, multiple times this line was used. If it moves, it should be encrypted. Now, that's something we can work with.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's mobile in any way, we should encrypt it. So if it moves around, make sure there's a way to encrypt it. So let's talk about what kinds of things should we worry about that move around. So we got, obviously, laptops, and that's the thing that comes to mind for most people first and foremost. But what other things do you end up encrypted, David?
Well, you have USB drives, which are, they move around. Any type of mobile drive. Smartphones, they can move around. More and more I'm seeing iPads and other types of tablets in practices that have data on those. I don't want to talk about the texting of data.
Whole nother topic.
And all that kind of stuff. But yeah, we even had in a local ambulance service a few months back, had a breach where they had removed hard drives from some computers, and it had PHI on them. So they decided that they would just hold on to them until they just needed to destroy them. Not sure exactly why they held on to them, but they were unencrypted drives, and they locked them away in a safe. But apparently the safe was not safe because somebody got in there and took all the drives. Mm-hmm. So it resulted in a breach because the data was not encrypted, and it was sitting on a hard drive inside of a safe somewhere.
Yeah, and that goes back to, well, I'm going to worry about encrypting my server, even though it's through 2 or 3 layers of storage. But my server is not something I can walk in an active environment that is being monitored and pick it up and walk out. But a hard drive in a safe, and I want to bet you that safe had a whole lot of other stuff in it.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't just a safe with that thing. We had a client one time that had a safe. It was a floor safe. And I mean, it was really big deal that they did They had this thing drilled into the floor underneath the building, and they would keep their backup devices in there. Well, it was brilliant until we realized that they're also in a floodplain. Wait, what? And it's in the floor. Let's review. So having that stuff in a safe, they should have evaluated and done a risk analysis before they put those things in there, right?
Yeah, because somebody had. I don't think it was burglary. It didn't specify that. Even in the local news reporting, it didn't. So it had to be somebody inside that did it, which means somebody had access to it that probably shouldn't have. They probably kept those drives in the same safe where they put other paperwork that other people have access to. And somebody probably decided that, hey, I need some extra hard drive space on my computer at home.
Yeah. Or I could sell these and make an extra buck.
Yeah. But, I don't know the details about how it was.
Yeah, they've kept that quiet.
Got missing. Yeah, I'm sure it was something that was crazy, but anything that can be easily stolen like that should certainly be encrypted.
Yeah. So, and remember, just because you buy something like the little, whether you call it a jump drive or a thumb drive or a USB drive or whatever, you buy something that says it has encryption on it, that doesn't mean that it's automatically encrypted. It means you can encrypt things on it. Mm-hmm. So some of them require that you launch some software and mount something and all of this kind of stuff to put it into an encrypted folder on it. And others, it's encrypted at the hardware level. So you create your 1Password and you're done. And that kind of gets to the issue at hand, is to understand that your encryption, we've talked about the mobile devices, and certainly you need to worry about the things in the cloud, because if it's going up to the cloud, it's moving. Mm-hmm. But your cloud apps are going to have their own world. So I want to mention them, but I also want to say that's really not where we need to go in this discussion. But when you look at the laptops that are lost, stolen, even desktops, if you don't have a security system and you don't have, you're in a high crime area, which I've checked to see what my crime statistics are for where my office is. That's on our risk analysis because of the cases where it's stolen. Well, if I'm in a high crime area and it's reasonable for me to think I'm going to be broken into, then I need to encrypt my desktops and my servers because they're not as safe. So you have to evaluate in your risk analysis what things need to be encrypted first. Mm-hmm. Then, once I know what needs to be encrypted because it's moving around or it can move around, I need to build an encryption plan. You don't just start encrypting things. If you do, things are going to go bad, usually. It's been my experience, because if you encrypt something and you lose the key's the key.
Yeah, you're in trouble. Yeah, you're in big trouble.
Because it's gone. It's gone.
It's not something you're going to take to the IT guy down the road and say, hey, I lost my encryption key. Do you think you can get these files back?
Right. It's absolutely that. Plus, once it's encrypted, but if you leave it logged on all the time so that somebody can just pick it up and it has no log off, no automatic log off, why even encrypt it?
Yeah.
If you have it open and you're using it, the encryption isn't even in play because you've decrypted everything by logging in.
Mm-hmm. And I see that happen too, where people will put encryption on their system, like especially a laptop. But what happens is when they log in just through their regular Windows login, then it kicks in and decrypts and all that. So basically what happens is, as long as somebody can turn the computer on and get through the Windows password, which is really easily to do, then they're through the encryption. So really the only protection they have is if somebody were to actually take the hard drive out of that laptop and try to access the data that way. Mm-hmm. But yeah, as long as they got the laptop, then yeah, the encryption's no good.
But make sure that you encrypt things and then put a password on it. Not very helpful either.
You mean you don't use password as your password?
Password 1, password 2, password 3. That goes with each of our laptops.
My password is, what is my password?
That's it. I like that idea you had. Set everybody to what is my password? What was it you said when they call?
Yeah, they'll call and say, "What is my password?" And then you say, what is your password?" And they'll say, "Now I'm asking you that." Well, I'm telling you, what is your password? Use your password.
Sometimes you're such a goober.
Who's on first?
But let's say that we've decided and we know what we're going to encrypt. So now our encryption plan starts with, what devices are we going to encrypt? Do we have external hard drives? You know, the CAP plan we just talked about in the previous episode, in it, the breach occurred because they were carrying backup devices that were unencrypted.
Mm-hmm.
And there are times where we ask people about their backups, and they may not have moved to doing a cloud backup yet, but they're doing at least offsite, where they're storing it on, you know, a mobile external hard drive, where they just plug that thing in, and then every day they take it out and carry it somewhere else, even if they just carry it with them home, the owner or the, you know, people in charge. Well, that's fine and dandy. Is that device encrypted? And many, many times you get the deer in the headlight look. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Wait, I hadn't even thought about that. And then you go ask, and no one actually looked to be sure. There were a lot of assumptions, and we know about assume. So we have to make sure that we account for even those kinds of things, and then really and truly push the fact that you shouldn't be taking things off site with those little USB drives. Don't think you're going to take a spreadsheet home. Just don't. Find another way to work from home and work it out, whether it's accessing your device remotely with a secure password or a VPN connection, those kind of things. But those little bitty devices can be dangerous as well if you're using those. So now I've got my list, and I know all of my things I want to encrypt. Next thing I need to do is decide what kind of methods and specifications on the encryption we want to do. Now, this is where the propeller really starts spinning for me. When you talk about FIPS and AES 128 versus 256 and all of those nerdy things, they really do mean something. It's not just us throwing words out there to make sure everybody thinks we're smart, which sometimes people throw those terms around. They don't even know exactly what they mean. But if we know for some method where we say we're going to use at least the industry standard minimum for encryption, what would you say that would be, David?
I would say the very minimum would be AES 128 minimum. Yeah, but I would probably shoot for 256 if that's an option.
I agree. So you're going to say at least the AES 128 should be a word that is in the mix of whatever method you're going to use. And with the methods, there's going to be a whole bunch of words. We're just telling you what to look for. So AES is a type of encryption that is really what most people consider the industry standard right now. Mm-hmm. And 128 is the original version of it, but 256 is the current version of it. And so it's how complex it is. The higher the number, the more complex. So just think of it that way and know that when you're looking at methods for encryption, if you see something that says AES 256 or 128, you're in the right arena. You don't have to understand what it means. Just know that that's a thing you're looking for. And then if somebody tries to blow the proverbial smoke, have them listen to this podcast. But once you've done something along those lines, now you can say, what are my methods for implementation? And when you look at that, there are a lot of methods. And we're going to talk about those in just a second. And then when you encrypt things, you have to have an encryption key. So your plan needs to have an encryption key management plan. You can't say all of my encryption keys are going to be password.
And some encryption keys can be physical as well.
Yeah. You can have a little thing you have to plug in, a little fob. And then, of course, every plan, particularly when you're looking at security and HIPAA, but security, if you're not checking, it may not be working. So there needs to be audits and verifications built into your plan. So that's what an encryption plan should say, is what devices, what level, what methods, how are we going to manage our keys, and how are we going to verify and audit it. Right, David?
That is absolutely correct.
So now let's talk about some of those things that get thrown around. And most people use Windows or Macs, and it's pretty easy to encrypt a Mac. I was actually very pleased with how easy it is, especially the MacBook Air, because it has the little fast SSD drive. So you just kind of fill in the information as you're going, and boom, it happens. Windows adds a whole nother layer of concerns because they always say that encryption is built in, but what does that really mean? So, yeah, it's built in up in now, but when you look at the versions of it, so all versions of Windows have what's called EFS encryption, which allows you to encrypt files and folders specifically, but not like the whole hard drive. So I'll let you go into the whole hard drive and the difference between those two things, because it's the nerdy stuff, and you get to nerd out.
I get to nerd out on it.
Yeah.
Well, I guess specifically, the full disk encryption is, for those who don't know, it's encrypting the entire hard drive. So every bit of data that's on that drive is encrypted with full disk encryption, or some people will say it's FDE encryption. So don't let people try to fool you with all these acronyms. So the full disk encryption covers everything on the drive. The other thing is what usually is called file encryption or file and folder encryption. And that's exactly what it says, where instead of encrypting the entire drive, you can encrypt a single file or group of files, or you can encrypt folders and do it that way. So earlier you mentioned actually about how much it costs to do some of these things. And, whole drive encryption or full drive encryption is a little more complicated. But with some of the file encryption, you can actually get some decent free software to even do quick file encryption. So you don't have to really pay a lot of money for some of these smaller solutions.
Right. I mean, for us, we say, look, at minimum if you're using Windows computers, at minimum do the folder file kind of approach, so that when you log in, it will decrypt automatically, and we just set it so that everything in the user folder, all the folders that the user will store things in, including, don't forget the downloads folder, we make sure that those are encrypted using the built-in with Windows file system. So then it's just a matter of, let me manage my keys and make sure I'm checking on things, because a user can turn that off.
Mm-hmm.
There's ways to control it, but if you're in a small environment, they probably have the ability to turn it off.
Right.
So that is where you look at the basics. And Windows, we do get asked specifically about BitLocker.
Mm-hmm.
And BitLocker is included. What versions of Windows?
7 and up, I believe.
Yeah, but it's not on the home version. You have to have
it's got to be Pro version.
Pro, Enterprise, whatever they're called, Windows 8 and all this kind of stuff. So if you don't have that, you can't just say, I have Windows, so it's built in so that I can do BitLocker. BitLocker is the full disk encryption. And there's also now hard drives as well that have encryption at the drive level itself that's built into the hard drive. So it has nothing to do with the operating system. And that gets to a whole nother level of complexity. So just know that just because you say, I have a hard drive that does have the hardware encryption, but there's some very specific things about how it works that causes a problem for me. So I can't turn it completely on. I have to use different varieties of encryption, and there's no sense in me going into those details.
Oh, please.
Hey, nay.
Bore us with those details.
But if you take it to the next level, and this is where you're going, because again, you've got to do the encryption key management, you've got to do the audits, you got to do the verifications. And yes, those things we just hit on, those are low cost or no cost other than your time to implement, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Now we get into the things that cost things, but there's a great deal of value. You get what you pay for, so to speak. And everybody's getting into this mobile device management because not just healthcare, but everybody else has the same concern. If it moves, it needs to be encrypted, and we need to know where it's at.
Mm-hmm.
And mobile device management is exploding, as I can see, and there's all kinds of apps out there. IBM bought a company that does it. It's MAS 360, which I always get confused because I work with accountants, and they used a MAS something app forever, but MAAS 360. So even IBM is doing this stuff. They're buying people. And then Manage Engine is a big name. And then, of course, you use Alert Boot.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a wide variety of these things out there. But the value is that you connect them to these services, and it starts then managing those devices and sets the encryption and controls the things. So can you give us like a high level? I know you use Alert Boot, just a high level of what Alert Boot does.
Well, Alert Boot is in and of itself kind of a dashboard for your encryption. So what it does is it's based off of Trend Micro's encryption service. And I think, I haven't looked, but I think they also can incorporate in with BitLocker now. When BitLocker first came out a while back, that was something they were working toward, and I think they finally got that. But basically what it does is it enables you to deploy that encryption, and then it manages that piece for you. So it communicates with your devices to make sure that encryption is still there and reports on that so that you can see that device is encrypted, it has stayed encrypted, and it throws in some mobile device management things like if, let's say, your device gets stolen, you can, press a button and it'll send out a signal that says, next time this device checks in, we want you to completely destroy the data on the drive so that it can't be recovered. And I think there's some location capabilities in there as well. And for those people who have your smartphones, you're probably familiar with that. If you lose your iPhone, you can go to iCloud.com and ping it or look for it, see where it's at. So it's the same kind of technology, but you can use it on anything you have encrypted, laptop, desktop, doesn't matter. And I know there's other apps that'll do that as well. But that's, in a nutshell, that's what it does. It looks at that information and reports back, gives you that management capability and reporting capability so that it makes all that part and piece easier to do.
Right. So long term, especially if you're a larger environment, you're going to want to do this. If you're small, what you want to do is find a HIPAA compliant IT company that can do these things, because they'll just add you in like you do. And we don't normally talk about pricing, but I know while it's not $1, it's also not exorbitantly expensive for a small environment to use the services that you do, right, David?
No, I don't mind giving out pricing just so people have a kind of an idea. You may pay less and you may pay more, but just for like the solution I use with Alert Boot, it's $79 per device per year. So we're not talking about thousands and thousands of dollars to do encryption. Even if you have 10 devices, you're looking at $1,000 a year or less.
Yeah. And you look at a lot of these smaller environments, they may have 2 or 3, so there's a lot of ways that you can find a way to do it with the higher end solution, which to me, MDM is the way to do it if you're, really wanting to lock it down and have all of the other abilities, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Yeah. So it's just not that expensive. I don't know. I know there are more expensive ones out there, and it's like anything else. It can run the gamut of everybody wants it to be free, and there used to be a really good actual free option out there called TrueCrypt. And for those of us in the IT community, that's kind of something that shook us up a couple of years ago when TrueCrypt came out and said, we're not going to be doing any more development on this. As a matter of fact, you probably shouldn't use it.
Yeah, we've realized things are not going well.
Yeah. So, I don't know about other IT companies, but I was running around going, oh no, we got to get TrueCrypt off all these machines.
Yeah, we were just about to load it up on a couple of devices, and I'm like,
yeah. So we have some people that, we had to go back and say, I know we told you that this was a free solution, but now we got to charge you for something different.
Yeah, you get what you pay for. That's all.
So, yeah.
But, when you look at, back to the discussion with the laptop that had the devices, and it was still, and they paid $750,000 to OCR plus the 3-year cap plus,
$79 would have been nice.
Yeah. Yeah. they would have been like, oh, I wish I'd have paid that $79. But, it's always that 2020 vision that you get looking back. That it gives people that kind of clarity.
Well, just so people don't miss what we're talking about here, tell listeners what happens in the case that we talked about in the last podcast episode where somebody had a smash and grab of a laptop. What would have happened had that laptop been encrypted?
It would have fallen under essentially the safe harbor rules that say that if you can show that it was properly encrypted, which goes back to having your audit and verification programs, not just say 3 years ago I encrypted it, so it's good. But I can show that I encrypted it and it's reasonable to believe it's still encrypted and there's no key being carried in the bag with it, then I don't have to notify anybody.
Okay, so it would have just all went away.
Yeah. Yeah.
So $79, honestly, it doesn't matter if it's $79 or $300. That's a whole lot better than $750,000.
Yeah, well, especially when you look at the statistics that showed in that report that was done, and I don't know whether it was the Poneman report or one of the others, but it showed that for an average healthcare organization, the cost of a breach like that averages around $2 million.
Mm-hmm.
And, it even for a business associate, it's $1 million. So clearly an investment in encryption should be high on the list.
What is that they say in healthcare? An ounce of prevention? It's the same thing in IT. Yeah. It's the same thing.
Yeah, you're right. That it's kind of ironic that we have so many doctors that give us this pushback when we're trying to prevent these kinds of things happening, yet they'll also complain about patients who won't do prevention themselves. So the irony is not lost on me.
Yeah, it's a lot of the same stuff.
Right.
At least the same mindset. Dealing with different things, but the philosophies are exactly the same.
Oh, yeah. I always try to explain that when we're working on a technology issue, it's like trying to figure out what's wrong with a patient. You just got the symptoms, and now you got to figure out what's causing them. And sometimes that takes a lot of tests, and it can take months. But I'm sorry.
Yeah, the good thing, though, is a doctor gets to ask the question, and then the patient goes, yes, it hurts right here. Whereas a computer goes, ding, error code 563842551. You're like, what the world is that?
Yeah, there you go. Ding.
Bing.
Click again. Ding.
Yeah.
I didn't do anything. So hopefully understanding this kind of open up the encryption planning, or at least have you evaluate your encryption plan to make sure you're covering all these things if you already have one. And if not, help you get started on the concepts of building one. And I guess that is enough geeky stuff for today.
Yep. I think people are probably overwhelmed and
they're done listening to us anyway.
Yeah. They're probably like, every time I listen to you, it just creates more work for me to do.
That's our plan. That's why it's free.
With the money back guarantee.
All right.
So if you enjoyed today's episode, head over to iTunes and give us a review. That helps us to get the word out and for other people to find us. And as we realized through an email we got, some people aren't finding it very easy to do the iTunes review. So let me remind you that it has to be done through the iTunes application, not through the iTunes website.
Right, so on your phone or your iPhone or your iPad.
Or you can even download iTunes on your device and do it.
You can do it on your computer from the iTunes app. You're right.
Right. So has to be done through the iTunes app. But if you'll take time to do that, we would greatly appreciate it. Also, we ask that you share out these episodes on your favorite social media platform. It gives us lots of exposure as well and gets the word out. And anything else you want to add before we finish, Donna? No. All right. So as always, remember that HIPAA is not about compliance. It's about patient care.
You've been listening to the Help Me with HIPAA podcast, hosted by Donna Grindle and David Sims. The show created to help you with HIPAA. For more information or to ask us a question, visit our website at helpmewithhipaa.com. Neither Donna Grindle or David Sims are attorneys, and they do not offer binding legal advice concerning regulatory compliance. The information in this podcast should not be relied upon or construed as legal advice in any way. Consult your attorney for legal advice concerning compliance with HIPAA regulations.